Good evening. My name is Anju, and it is such a pleasure for me to be here with everybody today at the start of the 4-week online certificate training course on ending violence against women, awareness of laws and policies in India. I do want to take the opportunity to start my special remarks by recognizing IMPRI and congratulating the entire team for designing and organizing such an important course that's incredibly required in the times that we are speaking today. I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate my friend, philosopher, guide, mentor, Professor VIBHUTI Patel, and of course with her today, the expert is Dr. Shalu Nigam. I'm proposing to divide my special remarks into kind of 3 sections. I thought since we're focusing on increasing violence against women on day 1, it would be really pertinent to reflect a little bit on the current health crisis that we are all emerging from and the kind of impact that it has had in a sharp increase in violence against women and girls. Of course, after that, I thought would be important for me to focus at least on 5 issues that I think are important and, that you can sort of keep in mind while you go through your own learning of the 4-week course. And of course, some of the concluding remarks and recommendations, specifically in the context of violence against women, laws and policies in India. Thank you so much for, sort of your time to listen to me. I'm awfully sorry that I could not join online in real time, but because of certain personal exigencies, I'm sending this recording your way. The first thing, of course, we've all known, like I said, and there is so much that has already been said, written, talked about, discussed in the context of COVID-19. We do know that there was a sharp increase in women's experiences of violence over the last 2.5 years, and this was global, it was national, it was local. We particularly saw an increase in women's experiences of domestic violence, specifically intimate partner violence, and other forms of violence as well, whether it was in public spaces or for especially the health frontline functionaries who were going out there to work, and of course a sharp increase in online or technology facilitated or technology assisted violence. We've all read that data, we've gone through those numbers, we've seen from 30% to as high as 200% increase in women's experiences of violence because of the burden of disease, because of the economic stress. People were locked down in their homes, very constrained spaces for a number of days. One of the interesting data that I had read then was that I think close to 81 point some percent, a little over 81% of India lives in 1 or 2 rooms. And at that point of time, when traditional support systems, including essential services for survivors and victims of violence, were almost non-existent, we can imagine what happened to the quality of all of those women, survivors and victims of violence. Incredibly though, in spite of these very difficult times, we also saw amazing examples of resilience and people coming together, whether as individuals, organizations, women's groups, women's movement. We saw a lot of support, innovative ways, including through technology-enabled solutions that came up during this time. What I'm actually hoping is, to, like I said, talk at least about 4 or 5 issues in addition to what we have seen emerge over the last, particularly the last 2.5, 3 years. The first thing that comes to my mind, and I just do want to qualify by saying, I'm not going to go into the definitional issues. I'm not currently going to, in my special address, go into the details because the course will give you that opportunity, and we do have a set of incredible, luminous experts who you will be interacting with. So the 5 that I want to focus on, of course, in the context of violence against women, and then laws and policies, if those are the 2 buckets that we're looking at, is number 1, that any form of violence against women, whether, like I said, it's in our private spaces, whether it's in the public domain, it's at the work site, and we do know that definitions of work and workplaces changed a lot during COVID times, or it is online, is a violation of their human rights. It is deeply entrenched in gender inequality and inequality of power. I think, that's the first point that is really important for us to understand. It's also critical to understand, therefore, that the root causes of violence are also embedded in this gender inequality. Whether we are looking at the forms, the nature, the type, the sites, the frequency of violence, when you're reading about the laws and policies, please understand that these are all emanating and, like I said, deeply entrenched in systemic and structural issues of gender inequality, which means that violence against women is both a cause and consequence of gender inequality. Therefore, do not look at or build or deepen your understanding of either violence or laws and policies that are associated with it in a vacuum. They exist in a deeply patriarchal, in a deeply discriminatory system, and therefore, important to build that comprehensive understanding. I think, particularly because in the recent times, we have seen a sharp increase also in the different kinds of violence. Like I said, we're seeing newer forms of violence, whether it is doxing, or it is cyber stalking, or we're looking at revenge porn or hate speech, cyber bullying. So whether the site is online or offline, that space is deeply gendered. So, that's really important to understand that. I think the third issue, which is kind of related to this, therefore, is that we really need to have a whole of sector approach, if I may say that, which means that we're not only looking at women, and particularly because, in this 4-week course, we're going to be focusing on violence against women. Of course, at some point of time, I hope to also draw your attention to who defines who's a woman, and therefore, how it's critical for us to start going beyond the binaries and look at the multiplicity and the intersectionality of being a woman. But coming back to my point that, we need to have this whole of sector approach, one that is empowering, where we're looking at women not just being as beneficiaries of these laws and policies that are focusing on ending violence, but actually being very active shapers, deciders, so to say, of stuff that has to do with their lives. Which means that we necessarily have to look at how do you strengthen their voice, choice, and agency when you're talking about violence against women and laws and policies. So who's drafting? Where are women? Just to pick an example, and I'm sure all of you would have read, I was just reading some latest data, and if I for a moment focus, just on the legal system, or, where we're looking at the representation of women in those spaces as we speak today, and surely, please do double check on the data, because I'm just, remembering and quoting this from hurriedly reading through some of that I think as of date, we're only looking at about 6% women in the Supreme Court and a little over 11% in the high courts. And if you look at overall women lawyers in the country, then we're looking at about 15 point some percent. So interesting to look at those numbers where we're saying that 1 in 3 women globally experience intimate partner violence. If I just pick that example, the numbers in India are similar to that. You know, if you look at the latest NFHS 5 data, you will find it's a little over 32%, almost 1 in 3, you know, for us as well here in India. And then you look at our representation in those spaces which are accountable for giving us that justice. So the whole point is that not only are we looking at women and girls as victims and survivors, but also women and girls as equal citizens of the country that have a role to play in defining their own destiny, like I said, as equal citizens. The number 4 point that comes to my mind here, of course, is that, you know, like I said, that laws are gendered. So, you know, they get formulated, they get defined, provisions get formulated, structures get made, systems are put in place in an ecosystem, in a space which is deeply unequal. And therefore, it's important to understand that sometimes the provision of the law itself may not be what it seems, you know. So also that behaviors need to be recognized as a violation of rights if we want to look at least a redressal or some solution in form of justice. So a good example of that comes to my mind is eve teasing. For a really long time, behaviors of stalking, voyeurism, everyday normalized sexist behaviors were seen as, you know, well, very normal behaviors. We did see the changes after the Nirbhaya case, and, you know, when we had the amendments that were made effective, and then you had those same behaviors being recognized, being defined, being acknowledged as stalking, for example, or voyeurism, and those then, you know, finding place as provisions in our laws, whether we're talking about criminal laws or civil laws. Therefore, during the course, I would think it's important to look at all of this, not purely from a legal perspective, but very clearly to also look at the political economy of it, but also the socio-cultural side of what's going on with our laws and policies, specifically relating to violence against women and girls. Number 5, of course, specifically in the context of laws and policies on ending all forms of violence against women, one of the other issues that I think is really pertinent is most often the large part of it we see is focused on the response, or at least gets defined as part of the response and not so much as prevention, which means that we're reaching out to that woman once she has experienced the violence and not before she actually experiences it. And specifically in the context of laws, I see that anything that has to do with, you know, access to that legal system, structure, pathways, whatever word we want to use, most often gets slotted into that category. Most of the policies as well, I see, look at prevention in a very limited manner, where it most often is, let's look at doing a campaign on behavioral change. So I think that part is really critical to understand, to unpack, to understand, you know, to sort of build knowledge around that. How are laws going to play a preventative role? how our policy is going to focus a lot more on prevention so we can stop it from happening in the first place. Like I say that, we can either keep on mopping the floor or close the tap. And prevention laws and policies is the bucket that we really want to focus on. Now, the big question is, how do we do this? Couple of things that come to my mind and I think are really critical is we definitely, in the context of laws and policies and violence against women per se, we need a lot more evidence. We need so much more evidence in understanding, in unpacking, like I said, a lot of what exists, but we do not have sort of research to back what we are saying. The second is investing in building and sustaining capacities of everyone who's accountable, the implementers and anyone who has to do with access to justice. The third, of course, is monitoring the implementation of those policies and the laws, because most often they get made and then we don't know what's going on with it. I think another important area is where we have to look at the resourcing and funding of this implementation. And like I said, you do have VIBHUTI as the expert, and I really do hope that there will be conversations around gender budgeting in the context of ending violence against women and laws and policies. So literally, how do we change from that allocating the funds to really looking at what will be the outcomes in terms of a violence-free life for women in India? I think another important issue that comes to my mind is also the harmonization, because you may have different pieces of legislation, you may have a number of sort of disparate policies, but then important to weave them together, look at that they're harmonized, and last but not the least, strengthening the data systems, including, like I said, recognizing and counting, because if you don't count, then the loop on that getting included into the policy is lost. So really, to better understand what's going on with our data systems around violence against women, specifically in the context of laws and policies, is really critical. I think, for all of you who've opted for this course, it's the best choice you've made. You're in the hands of experts, who come with, it's just such an amazing mix of experience out there. And I wish you the best. And I really do hope that at the end of the 4 weeks, we will have a cohort of champions of feminist jurisprudence. I will stop at this point and wishing you all the best for your course. Thanks a lot again to IMPRI for giving me this opportunity to address you all and to listen to me. Thank you so much again. Good evening.